Welcome, everybody, to the post-screening discussion for The Third Coast. My name is Jessica Green. I am the artistic director of the Houston Cinema Arts Festival, and you guys are in for a treat. So we are going to talk to Susan and Alan Raymond, the directors of The Third Coast. And I'm just going to share a little bit of information about them because they are incredible. Academy Award-winning filmmakers Susan and Alan Raymond are among America's most influential and distinguished independent documentary producers and directors. The films of Susan and Alan Raymond reflect our society's changing values and changed the course of television history. As the filmmakers of the seminal 1973 PBS Cinema Verite series, An American Family, the Raymonds captured the daily life of the Loud family, which foreshadows America's rising divorce rate and the emergence of the gay liberation movement. The Raymonds continued a friendship with the Loud family that spanned 30 years and produced two additional films. American Family Revisited explored the family's perspective on being media celebrities and their reflections on the evening of their parent separation. In 2002, as Lance Loud entered into hospice, the eldest son of the family, he requested that the Raymonds make a final film of his life. Lance Loud, A Death in an American Family, celebrated the life and legacy of Lance Loud as a gay icon and the first reality TV star. The Raymonds received international acclaim for Children in War, a disturbing look at the effects of war and terrorism on the lives of children in Bosnia, Rwanda, Northern Ireland, Israel, and Palestine. They also published a book for HarperCollins about their experiences making the film, also entitled Children in War. The documentary received a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Informational Special in 2000, the year 2000. In 1994, the Academy Award for Best Feature Documentary was awarded to the Raymonds for I Am a Promise, The Children of Staten Elementary School. And the Raymonds' first independent production was an experimental video called The Police Tapes from 1977 that documented a police precinct in the South Bronx. This Emmy Award documentary directly inspired Hill Street Blues and the many reality TV cop shows that followed. The Raymonds continue to specialize in feature-length documentaries that have included such topics as education, prisoners' rights, religion, police, bluesmen, and Elvis. Their films have been broadcast on PBS, ABC News, HBO, Cinemax, and the BBC. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Susan and Alan Raymond to the conversation. Hi.
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 Hi, thanks so much for doing this and joining us. So excited to have you and so excited to talk about The Third Coast. Mm-hmm. Happy 40th. To the release of The Third Coast, right, which was released in '81. So let's get into it and talk about that. Like, how did The Third Coast as a film come to be, and how was it received in '81 when it was released?
Well, we want to thank you from our hearts that you're playing this film. It's a delightful film. It's one of my favorite films because I think it is a fun film. We had just finished making some really tough films. We'd done Police Tapes in a high crime precinct. We had done Bad Boys in juvenile detention centers. And all of a sudden, the programming manager from KARA, the Dallas PBS station, came to us and said, could you please make a film about Texas? It's going to be in this series of 5 hours. And one was from Canada, one Germany, one Sweden. But she said, Texas, anything. So, I mean, this is a gift. So we could have done anything. We could have done oil. We could have done, anything. So we decided to do Houston because it was popping. It was just growing. There was so much energy happening in Houston at that time. And I always want to say, I want to go someplace where people are happy to see me. So we went to Houston. We rented an apartment. We stayed about 4 months. It was just the two of us. There were no production managers, researchers, associate producers, just the two of us on 16 millimeter with a camera assistant, Virginia Diaz. And we just drove around, read the newspaper, talked to Texas Monthly editors, and tried to do a profile of the city at that time, which was about 79. And I remember this great fun, really. And you could call people and say, hello, I'm making a profile of Houston, I'm from PBS, would you be in the film? And they'd say, how's tomorrow? Come on over. And that was extraordinary after trying to do with the police and the juvenile detention centers. And go, yeah, come on over, you know.
Yeah, I think permissions have really changed
Right.
over the years, but that surely was one of the easiest films to make in terms of, I mean, for example, the police allowing us to come in on a police shooting lesson where the instructor is telling the Houston police officers that they can go out and buy any gun they want. There are no, requirements in terms of what they should carry. I think also, just going back a moment, this was a series called Exchange. It was an international series. Our show was the premiere episode, was shown in those countries, Sweden, Germany, and Canada as well. It was a magazine format film. Normally when we, I think pretty much do documentaries, we usually do single subject stories, but here, because it was the city basically that we were profiling and its culture, I think we decided to sort of mix and match between kind of serious and somewhat more amusing sequences. But even those sequences, had some point. The Karl Lagerfeld fashion show at Neiman Marcus, for example, was a kind of watermark, I think, for people in, I guess, the upper echelon of Houston who believed that, they were as entitled as anyone to have an international fashion designer come and, premiere a collection. As far as the reaction to the show goes, it was widely reviewed, and those were the days, of course, where there was newspaper, print, TV critics, who would write fairly lengthy reviews, and we looked them over recently. It basically got a lot of good reviews. People thought the mix and match of the serious and the kind of humorous was good. Many of the critics thought it was odd that we made the film, because they had thought they knew that we had done these sort of serious social issue documentaries. So in a couple of the reviews, they said, well, we were taking a vacation, as if it was some sort of anomaly that we would go and do a popular culture subject like this. A lot of the reviews also talked about the content of the film. One of the Louis Welsh, the former mayor and president of the Chamber of Commerce, remark about how the Civil Rights Act had turned all cities into African American city was singled out, and I think the police shootings as well. So I thought it was generally well reviewed and well received. Due to a sort of circumstance of scheduling, we had gone to work as network news producers for ABC, and they had sent us to Northern Ireland, and we had done a film on the IRA and the British Army called To Die for Ireland. It was an hour-long ABC News close-up, and that, oddly enough, aired prior to The Third Coast, even though we had made the film before. Mm-hmm. So we were following, the IRA at the height of the troubles, and all of a sudden this sort of somewhat light film comes on. We're going, what's this all about? But,
yeah, very, very different. It's so interesting what you said. I mean, for sure, permissions have changed, but in terms of, Houston today, I mean, I found that to be the case too, that there's an incredible, being from New York City, born and raised in New York City, there's an incredible openness that I think is very cultural. That kind of come on over tomorrow is really special and is very much germane, I think, and indicative of the culture there, to this day. It premiered, right, at another festival in Houston, longstanding festival, World Fest, right? The Houston World Fest. I think it premiered in '80. How did that go? How was it received in Houston?
Won an award.
Won the award at the festival. It also played in the Los Angeles film.
Right.
Well, and a couple of others. Won a number of awards.
Yeah. So it was well received in Houston as well. It sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah.
I kind of noticed when I was reading the reviews, there was this East Coast prejudice against Houston, and that I think, hopefully, the film shines through with the people. The people come on and they're very genuine and they're very open. And the thing that I love about Houston is they don't care. I mean, they don't care. They're Houston, they're proud, this is their city. Let New York be New York, you know. And so I enjoyed that about Houston a lot. The people were really, really warm and welcoming. And one of my great fun parts about the film is we were there and I said, well, you know, is
Glenn McCarthy.
Is that man still alive? What do you think? You know, I looked him up in the phone book, found his office. He answered the phone. I mean, only one person has that voice. And I say to him, can I come over? And he goes, tomorrow's good. We come over, and of course I have my questions. And of course, he doesn't want to answer mine and my questions because he had an agenda. And he wanted to say what he actually said, which is in our film. And we did this great interview of this iconic character. It was a gift.
Edna Ferber based who became the James Dean character in the movie Giant on his life. He also had one time owned a big hotel called the Shamrock Inn, and you know, was on the cover of Time magazine. So he was a person of some importance. And of course, in addition to Glenn McCarthy, who was sort of the older version of the Texas wildcatter, we had Robert Mossbacher in the film as well, who was a modern oil man. Who, you know, again,
come on over, let us film a, you know, verity scene of him talking about, you know, drilling wells. I remember he even invited us to dinner at his house. It was afterwards, very cool. Yes. Like we went over to his house for dinner. Everybody was like really friendly. I think the only problem we had in the entire film, in terms of people not wanting us to film it, was in the Houston Ship Channel. I think it's. We got evicted.
We got thrown off the boat at some point.
By Exxon.
I mean, yeah, I don't think the captain of the vessel, who was the main character, who's describing the importance of the Houston Ship Channel and ship channels in general for the growth of large cities, was fine with us. But when it was found out what we were doing, I remember we were just sort of dumped on the dock.
They just pulled over
to the
side.
Over and said, so we did. But we had shot the scene by then.
Right.
So it didn't matter.
We can slip.
And I guess that was the oil industry.
And then I wanted to go to NASA. You had to go to NASA if you were in Houston. You just had to. And we couldn't get in. That was
They were a little difficult.
That was difficult. So we had
because we wanted one of the astronauts who had gone to the moon
to
tell the story. Houston, the Eagle.
Yeah.
So the first word spoken was, you know, Houston. So
we
got it, but it was a bit of a hassle.
I suspect that might be easier now, that piece.
Maybe, yeah.
Because there's so much interest right now in like PR for NASA and you know, the move to populate the moon and figure out how to live there, to go to Mars and So there's so much interest in telling that story. That's interesting. I wonder if you would have more luck now.
What were they building at that time?
Well, they had the space shuttle, which they let us go in, by the way. And they said, "You want to go film inside the space shuttle?" Okay, so we went. You know, they're actually
they were working on a prototype of something, and an astronaut was in the control booth, and it wasn't working, and the astronaut was swearing a blue streak, and they were terrified that we record that. So that's what they were protecting, their astronaut. So of course we interviewed Al Bean, who's wonderful.
Right.
Yeah,
and this is post Apollo 13, right? This is post some problems happening. It's
and
the
also the overview, the future. And that was which is sort of
Houston.
The subtext of the film, which is, does Houston resemble the future?
And it does.
I think in many good and bad ways.
Yeah, totally.
Did and does.
Yeah, I mean, that actually leads into my next question. You know, the theme for the festival, the Houston Cinema Arts Festival this year, this is the 13th Houston Cinema Arts Festival, is the Third Coast. So I was so excited when I discovered your film after conceiving of this theme for the festival. And then when I watched it, it's just wild. It's so prescient. I mean, so many, you talk about the Wildcatters, like, so the Wildcats, so many of the themes around policing, the themes around demographics in city, the fear of the brown and black bodies invading cities, right? The themes, theme of lethal force, the theme of glamour, the Karl Lagerfeld show, the theme of what, was described in the last few years as what's called the yeehaw agenda, which is kind of this kind of cowboy aesthetic, right? That's still very much, in Houston and in the planet, and kind of resurges and recedes depending on what's happening in the world. So my question is, like, have you watched it recently, and what are your impressions of the film now? And also, have you been to Houston since then?
I wish we had. No, it's been quite some time.
We did make a second film in Houston. It was also a public television documentary. I think we made it about 1990. It was called Chiefs, and it was a profile of 3 police chiefs. We did Daryl Gates in Los Angeles, Tony Boza, then in Minneapolis, but who was the Bronx Borough commander of the police tapes, and Lee Brown in Houston. So we actually came back to Houston to do, what turned out to be about a 20-minute segment in an hour film on the police department itself. Lee Brown had been brought in. He was an African-American police chief to reform the police department.
Yeah, I remember.
I don't know to what extent he did, but didn't. There's a pretty long sequence in the film where civilian complaints people come into his office and tell pretty horrific stories. So I'm sure he had a lot to deal with. I think he also went on to be the mayor of Houston at some point. Maybe I'm correct or not correct about that. But anyway, so that was our second foray to Houston, but it was only on the police department.
Have you watched The Third Coast recently?
Just for the screening we watched.
So please share, like, what were your thoughts?
I loved it. It's a gift. This film is a gift. I keep remembering going and talking to all those people and everyone being so open and friendly. It was fun. It was really fun. And when we do the Karl Lagerfeld and I get to interview him, and he has that wonderful quip that he's not the Queen of England, that's great. McCarthy's great. But then when we go and we look at the ship channel and I say, how did we get in the door? Why did they let us in? I can't believe this. We must be charming, I guess. I don't know. But that was stunning that we got into the police.
Yeah.
So it'll be a treasure for me because it's fun. It's an upbeat energy film, because our other films are pretty, our socialist films are pretty serious,
There's some serious stuff in it, though.
Yeah, well,
and it does raise a lot of questions, right? I mean, look at the winter that just happened in Texas last year, the infrastructure questions. I mean, there's so many themes that, just resonate today, right? And I would say,
And I think that, we always believe that one of the strengths of our films is that they're kind of timeless. In other words, the film that we, for example, won an Academy Award for, I'm a Promise, the Children of Stanton Elementary School, we spent a year in North Philadelphia filming, an elementary school there with a 500 student African-American body, ages 5 to 10 years old. You could look at that film today, although it was made in the early 90s, and every issue about urban education, poverty, single-parent homes that, is addressed in that documentary still resonates,
Yeah.
We like to make our films kind of, in a way that's not dated, I think even films like Police Tapes or American Family, I mean, people look at them, they still enjoy them, as if they were watching a film, made today.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, The Third Coast is just, it's really incredible. And then the other thing I wanted to say about it was just, it's also incredible the extent to which it reflects what's happening, nationally also, and really is timeless in terms of, being a reflection of the United States, which I think Houston is also quite capable of being. Houston is a kind of, I think, microcosm, and Texas really is really a kind of microcosm of the United States.
Well, it's a very important state politically,
Very important. And stuff that plays out, in Houston and in Texas is playing out everywhere. And I think, the film really, the entrepreneurship, the glamour, the whole, again, the whole urban cowboy sequence, the whole kind of, that whole kind of cowboy aesthetic that is still so present in Houston and has kind of come into resurgence. And yeah, the heavier stuff around infrastructure, around policing, it's a mix. But I think that also really reflects Houston and the country, that kind of mixed bag, right? Of all the good, the bad, and the glamorous, the good, the bad, and the Karl Lagerfeld.
Right, right.
But I also think it's uniquely American. It's unique place. Our American cities are different. I mean, New York is a big metropolis, and Chicago as well. But it's just so unique that it's good that it had a capsule portrait of it at that time. Because it's still a powerful city. I mean, huge.
Yeah. And it really is incredible how many of the themes y'all captured still really define Houston.
Mm-hmm.
It's really foundational, I think, in terms of understanding the city. So much is explored in your film that really depicts, what is most foundational to the identity of the city. So, I mean, bravo. It's so amazing. I love it. And I'm so excited that we're able to share it. Let's pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about you guys. So how did you get started? How did you become filmmakers? How did you start your partnership?
We hate this question.
You hate it? Can you just give us a little
young.
We're very young.
Very, very young.
We're practically out of high school.
Yeah, really.
Very, very young. And I started working I actually started working in film in college. I went to NYU Film School and worked for some of the legendary cinema verity filmmakers, Drew Associates, Maisels, Bill Jersey. And so I had sort of started a career in New York. I'm a New Yorker, in filmmaking. I met and married Susan in Chicago. It's another long story. And at some point, I think I was on the producing a film at the 1968 presidential election. If you remember Chicago and the death of Robert Kennedy, it was like a nightmarish film to make. I decided at that point I was spending a lot of time away from her that maybe it would be nice to team up, and so we sort of began working together.
And I refer to this section as I married a Nagra, because that is what happened to me. He said, "Here, we're going to go. We're going to be on the road. It's going to be great, and you have to carry this, and it's only 25 pounds. Good luck." And that was it. And for the next 30 years, I carried that Nagra, and we went all over the world, and we made all the films together. And obviously, we kept throwing ourselves into the deeper end of the pool. We would go to high crime precincts or refugee camps, prisons. I mean, it just got more serious and serious. So we all stepped up and handled the producing and the directing part. But we always loved cinema verite. That was always our first love, to do it in a observational style.
I think also what happened was, after our experience of the American Family, of course, was such a formative experience for us, spending the 7 months filming The Louds in Santa Barbara, and then it turning into this, hugely successful TV series, 10 million people a week watching, etc. But the thing was that we were working under a producer. And I think after that experience, we just said, forget it. We're only going to make films that we produce and we have total creative control over, and we're not going to be working for anyone anymore. So that film, of course, was the Police Tapes, which we made after American Family, which was quite...
And to show you how serious we were, we received a grant of $5,000, of which PBS kept $2,000. So we got $3,000.
New York State Council of the Art grants. Right?
We got $3,000 on your own. Come back when you got footage.
Well, it was made for the TV Lab, which was an experimental division of the New York Public Television Station 13. And although we had done and continued to film in 16 millimeter film. This was pre-digital days, way before what we have now to make documentaries with. But Sony had come out with some early portable video equipment, and David Loxton, who was head of the lab at that time, knew that we were experienced documentary filmmakers and asked us if we would be interested in experimenting with this small format portable video equipment, which was pretty rinky-dink.
Oh my. It actually was, Nandrin Paik was very instrumental in creating the lab along with David Loxton, and they wanted to give access to all sorts of different kinds of artists, like Twyla Tharp came for dance, and Don Mishner was her director, and they worked together. There was a lot of video artists there working, and we were considered documentary people, so they invited us. And we actually went out with the original deck that Nam June used. So this thing was gaffer's tape together, and I couldn't get over it. And I remember, we just done American Family and shot 300 hours of 60 millimeter. So I remember going to the technician, and this box, I get to carry the box, another 25-pound
reel-to-reel tape
with the anchor, So I said, well, how does it work? Okay, how does it work? And the guy with total patience says, well, it's either on or it's off. That's it. And I go, okay, this is it. This is it. We're rolling.
The only advantage, we shot in black and white, which actually is kind of cool because since it was a police documentary, it has, as many people have pointed out, a kind of film noir look to it. And the big advantage was that it had a thing called a Nubicon tube in the camera, which pretty much allowed you to shoot under literally any kind of light. Most of the documentary is shot at night.
Yes.
Usually overnight, we would go out, with the late shift and stay all night and come back to our apartment in New York City at dawn. But it was an interesting film in another way because it was also the dawn of the democratization of documentary filmmaking, meaning that this was the first example of inexpensive equipment now being able to be used by people who could go out and make their own documentaries. 16 millimeter filmmaking was very expensive. The raw stock alone was like $100 for a 10-minute roll. To process it cost another $300 or $400. So, you really needed a big budget to do an hour-long documentary. And what was interesting was we made the film, and it was originally a 90-minute documentary, a feature length, and turned it into Channel 13. And David Loxton offered it to public television to be shown nationally, and it was rejected. Their claim was it had technical issues because it was a small.
It was half-inch.
It was half-inch video bumped up to 2, and
Very amateur.
it was amateurish type video. But David said, but honestly, Alan and Susan, the real reason PBS rejected this film, and they told him this, was that they didn't want anyone going out and making documentary films with this cheap, inexpensive equipment. So it really was this old guard idea of, to be a documentary filmmaker, you had to be in the CBS News reports, Edward R. Murrow tradition, and with a correspondent, blah, blah, blah. And the idea that, this inexpensive equipment could be gone out with by one or two people and do social issue documentary and, edit it inexpensively as well, actually scared people at that time. Now, of course, we completely take it for granted. I mean, people can make documentaries on their cell phones, but in those days, it was not the case. What was ironic, of course, is that Channel 13, the New York station, aired the show alone. So it played in New York City. It won a local Emmy for Best Documentary. And then ABC News Close-Up, which was the documentary division of ABC News, called us and said, would we be interested in selling the film to them and airing it as an ABC News close-up? They had no problem with the technology. Right. So we did. We cut it down to an hour, and it aired as an ABC News close-up network news special. I think it was the first time they had ever run an independent documentary, as part of the network news division. And that film, and that version won national Emmys for Best Documentary and Editing and Cinematography. And then we got hired by ABC News to be network news and went to Northern Ireland and said the rest of the story. But so it is an interesting time in the sense that people should understand that there was a period when people who made documentary films had to have a lot of money, had to understand how to use fairly complicated film technology, because verity filmmaking is not that easy, especially when you're shooting film. And Susan is recording sound separately, on the Noir, as she said. And it wasn't really a turning point, I think, in many ways.
It was also a turning point for us as directors, because we had just come off American Family, and we were very orthodox cinema verite. No questions, no interviews, no reenactments, just let it play, just everything.
Whatever the lighting
unfold.
was in the room, we would shoot.
That was it. But so we get to the precinct, and we are with cops and we were shooting the first several hours of it in verite, and it's all chaos and screaming and night lights. And I remember sitting with Loxton looking at some rushes, and he says, "I don't understand what's going on." I said, "Well, of course you don't, because that's what a cop does." He gets a phone call of your worst thing has happened. You've been burglarized, you've been robbed, something terrible, really terrible has happened to you. You call the cop, he shows up, he or she has to figure out what's happening. And Loxton says, "Oh, well, that's all very fine, but what do you think the audience is going to do?" So for the very first time, I had to ask questions. I had to just probe the officer and say, well, who did it and why did they do? So that was the first time we changed into actually speaking to the subjects and asking questions. And that was also the realization, not everything can be cinema verite. There's certain subjects that just need more information for the audience. You can't leave the audience loose on the streets. You have to give them guidance.
I think that's one of the sort of hallmarks of our, if you want to use the phrase, filmmaking style, which is that it's an adaptive verite style. I mean, we have done films that are just totally verite. We've done films where we do informal. The police tapes really was kind of off the cuff interviewing, often at the crime scene or back in the precinct. They weren't really formal sit-down interviews. But, we then later have done formal sit-down interviews. Susan became the voice of video verite and narrated a number of our films like Children in War and I Am a Promise, for which I believe she was nominated for an Emmy and for the narration. And so, I think that verite is a great format, and I think observational filmmaking is wonderful, but it doesn't always work with every subject. And,
well, the American Family was a family. All of us come from a family, so we all understand that situation. We also made a film about a church. It's called The Congregation, and so many people do belong to a religious order, so they understand that. So that was done in cinema verite. But when we had, in refugee camps or prisons, and, access was really tough, you really had to just go straight in and ask questions. And so,
also in Children of War, for example, we had to give a capsule history of what the conflict was about. I mean, in the case of Rwanda, we went there really at the end of the war in Rwanda. But, to understand what the Bosnian War was about and the different factions within the country, you had to really narrate that. And,
but still, when you capture something that's live and accurate and honest, nothing beats that footage. Nothing beats it. It's a golden moment, and you always strive to set out trying to shoot it in that way if you can.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I asked you the question you didn't want to answer, how you got started, because, oh my God, everything you just said was so incredible. Everything you shared was so amazing. So, and yeah, I would just say that it just seems like everything, your whole careers have been about adaptation. This incredible, that you went from 16 millimeter when you made An American Family to like the first people doing video for the police tapes. It's mind blowing, and it's incredible and fascinating. And I'm just so grateful for all of your work and everything you've done. A couple of questions as we wrap up, because we're getting to the time of wrapping up. With the police tapes and the Third Coast in mind, which does document policing also, and these films were made at similar times, about 40 years ago, 40 plus years ago. What are your thoughts on how documentation of policing, how it's evolved over the years from police cams on police officers to, witnesses or victims of police brutality, documenting it? Do you have any thoughts on how that's changed, how policing is documented, and policing itself, as people that have really done a lot of work in this area and documented this field? Curious just what you think. We're at this real inflection point around policing, and I'm just, what do you guys think?
It's a kind of complicated question. I mean, I think that
Sure.
I think the police have enjoyed a long ride. I hated, for example, the series Cops. It was the polar opposite of our documentary, The Police.
For sure, definitely.
All the cops were heroes. All the crooks, usually a minority people were, the villains. They always had that sickening shot at the end of the day where the cop goes home, to his family, and it was really I thought a reprehensible whitewash of what policing was really about. I mean, it is a very difficult job, and I'm sure the majority of people who work as police officers try to do their job as best they can. But police brutality and police shootings were covered up for years and years and years. And finally, when they got to the body cam, and I would also say the witness cell phone videos,
yes,
became a big part of it as well, which is another video technology. It finally got out in the open and people began to confront it. Although even with all the confronting that's happened and all the terrible examples that we've seen in the last few years, I don't think that much has changed. I mean, I just think it's a really societal issue that, people who live in, lower income communities or marginal neighborhoods are always kind of in the situation where they're possibly going to be, abused by the police. But hopefully, with all the exposure that it's gotten and publicity, there'll be some maybe generational change, and things will improve.
It's an interesting dichotomy that the technology made this giant leap forward, and policing didn't change. So that's a terrible statement on our country.
Mm.
It really does need more transparency. So it's interesting that technology is, we hope, forcing that change. Let's hope that certainly more transparency is definitely.
Yeah.
I don't think police realize in situations where they can be observed by ordinary citizens that cell phone video evidence is always going to be something that can come back and bite them. So I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, no, that complicated relationship between technology and advancement is real. Look at social media. I don't know if we're doing so great with some new technologies. So last question.
I just want to backtrack for 1 second really quick and say, one of the other things we learned from the experience of making the American Family series is that documentary filmmakers really do have moral and ethical concerns that they should think about when they make their films. That film, of course, because of what happened in that family's life, during the course of our filming, became a kind of, symbolic problem. And we did, as you probably know if you watched the movie Cinema Verite, have, our differences with the producer, Craig Gilbert. There's actually a scene in the movie where I punch him, or the actor playing me punches him. But I think that that's something that we've really tried to take into account, and to be non-judgmental. We've done a number of prison documentaries where our cast may have committed, horrendous crimes, but somehow to try to understand why that person became a criminal, whether they could be reformed. We did last film for HBO called Toe Tag Parole, which is about the sentence of life without parole, which is so often called the other death penalty, and what that means to put people in prison who will never have the opportunity to get, return to society, and, what our prison and punishment, society, tells us about our society. So I think, it's all, the technology is all very interesting. Of course, today it's all digital, but I think it's also something that, sometimes people don't really think about when they begin to become documentary filmmakers, is that your relationship with the subjects is really an important.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And thank you for all of the observational empathy in your work that, that we all, learn and grow from. I don't know if I had been in touch with you guys years ago. I worked for Albert Maysles, not so many years ago. He's gone now, obviously, rest in peace. But yeah, we talked about that, just the whole point of you have to walk in another person's shoes and you're, what you all do, what I'll do. It's so important to just all of, it's an empathy machine, observational documentary that is empathetic. It is an empathy machine. It does build empathy and humanity. It really plays a role. And I'm just so grateful for the genre of cinema verite and for your work and for your flexibility to do what you need to do. And sometimes, your hybridity and doing whatever kind of form you need to do to make the piece work, which, is not surprising because you've just have so much range and you've been so flexible and so successful. So that makes sense. So last question, what are you working on now? And what, if you're willing to share, what are your thoughts on this current state of documentary?
Those are big questions.
Which one do you want to answer?
Well, I think in the current state, it looks to me that everybody's working. There are so many films out there, and a lot of foreign films too, international subject matter. So I think it looks good. Everybody's working. So I hope everybody's working. So I find that like an explosion, of all of these subjects that are available to you. So I think it looks good from where I'm sitting because, we watch all these films and see all of these films, and I'm always impressed. And everybody has all these little cameras, so everything's lighter. Oh my God, that's wonderful. So it looks good.
Okay.
But what are we doing now?
Well, we part of our filmography also involves, we made two music documentaries we made. One is a pretty well-known one called Elvis 56 we did for HBO, which was about the first year in Elvis's life, which is a very popular film. And then we also did for the BBC Sweet Home Chicago, which was a history of the Chess Records label, which is a blues label. So we're currently in that mode, not in the verite mode. We're doing preparing and developing two music documentaries.
Nice.
One on the life of Little Richard.
Oh.
Great story. Great story.
Oh my God.
About cultural appropriation, a superstar who was gay in the 1950s, and then who, became religious and gave up his career at the height of his career. It's a great story. And we're also developing another music documentary. We don't want to talk about that one at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Sort of in music documentary mode.
Yeah. Well, I love the Little Richard tidbit. Oh my God, that is the perfect note to end on. I will look for that. That's so exciting. Well, it's really been such a pleasure and an honor to speak to you, Susan and Alan Raymond. I am such a fan of your work. I'm so excited that we're able to show the Third Coast in the festival. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for everything and all of your amazing film work, which has just been so influential on so many levels.
Well, thank you for including our film.
Thank you for including our film.
Thank you. All right. Bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.